Welcome to this episode of the Voices of the South. This is the podcast where we explore topics of development from a global South perspective. Here, you will find interviews with social innovators alongside audio essays focusing on different topics. Thank you for hearing us, and be sure to subscribe and share the episode if you liked it. Welcome, everybody, to the Voices of the South. Today, we have the opportunity to interview a voice that has been supported and promoting social innovators in the Global South for more than 2 decades. Today, we have the chance to chat with Joel Adriance, who has been promoting social innovation in Latin America and Africa since 2010. Joel has worked alongside many organizations like the International Youth Foundation to empower the dreams and goals of hundreds of young change makers, who, in turn, have improved the life of probably thousands of people. As such, without anything more to say, welcome, Joel, to the Voices of the South.
Thank you, Carlos. It's really a pleasure to be here.
No, the pleasure is ours, really. We feel really glad that you agreed to participate with us in the interview. As we said in the introduction, you have over 2 decades of working with social innovators, the majority of them youth, which is something that is really important since at the end of the day, the world that we create today is not for self, but for the people that come behind us, which leads me to the first part of the interview. And I wanted to ask you if you sort of can go back to memory lane and tell us what led you to become part of the social innovation system. What was that spark that you found out about and decided that you wanted to work alongside and empowering people that wanted to change the world?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And there's a lot of different elements that I could share. But just to give some context, perhaps for those who might be listening, I've done a number of different things over the years. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Ecuador, where I worked with a local nonprofit and with city governments and with change makers of very different types. A lot of the work I was doing in that period was with around youth leadership and youth and social change. I've also worked for shorter periods for a handful of nonprofit organizations. I spent about a decade at the International Youth Foundation, where I was really lucky to be involved with an incredible program called Youth Action Net. And Youth Action Net was a network of national, regional, and global programs that supported young social entrepreneurs and change makers through a fellowship model. It was a network that was led around the world, and it was at its height. It had 23 different affiliate programs that all shared a model and a community. And I managed, in particular, the Latin America portfolio of programs, and so I was leading 12 programs in Mexico, Costa Rica, Honduras, Peru, Chile, Brazil, Spain, and Portugal, actually, as well, because of language. And then I also helped to manage some of the global network, and so we had programs in Africa. We had a program in Australia. We had programs in the Middle East, among other parts of the world. And in that period, I had the chance to both work with the ecosystem of support and with young change makers, young social entrepreneurs in their 20s, basically, for the most part, who had founded a social initiative and were looking to grow its impact and sustainability. And so, direct training work, coaching work, organizational development support, and then obviously the work more on the ecosystem level. Last few years, I've been working as an independent consultant, working with a variety of clients, including social enterprises, nonprofits, businesses that are working in a few different areas, but mainly around entrepreneurship, innovation, and youth development. Those are some of the areas where I have expertise. But kind of all of that journey, and I studied social sciences, I studied education, also along the way. But a lot of the journey, when you ask about why, I think goes back to an earlier period in life, and that I was brought up in a family where my parents are extremely involved in community activities of different types. Um, uh, and whether that's in their religious community, participating in different, civic activities, local community activities, racial justice activities. My dad, both my parents are now retired, but my dad, worked in environmental activism for his most of his professional career. My mother's a lawyer; she worked in the public sector. Um, but this sense of growing up that this interest in community and civic activities and the idea of social change, the idea of contributing to something larger than yourself, as that's a core part of sort of the meaning of life and what makes life worth living. um, and then when I was a teenager, kind of my own journey of starting to get involved in different activities as a young person in the community. And I helped to, at that time, the term social entrepreneur was not very well understood. It existed. Obviously, if you look at the work of Ashoka and other organizations going back into the 90s in particular, these concepts were around, but it was largely not understood, I would say, until probably like around the time I started International Youth Foundations, around like 2010. You start to see this concept more. And in the last, 12 years or so is where it's really taken off. But when I was a teenager, these concepts were not very common. But, I found myself doing an activity that I would later describe as, a type of social entrepreneurship, which was that with a group of friends, we started uh, a community service project where we brought together like a large group of young people who were on school vacation to do community service activities. Over like a 10-day period where it was all youth run and led, where we brought group together. We kind of got people to sign up for the project. We trained ourselves and brought in people to train us over, I think it was like 3 days. And then we went out for a week and we did different service activities in the community. And then we came back. And I helped us start that project, and then helped to run it for about 3 years, and then kind of moved on. And so that was kind of an experience I had at a very formative age in sort of starting something, creating something that hadn't existed, that met a social need, working with others, raising funds, gaining buy-in from key actors, promoting the opportunity, and then doing something that we felt had an interesting impact, and seeing what it did in the world, right? Which I think kind of is the essence of change making. Um, and so, just kind of wrap up a lot of pieces of what I've just shared. It came back to, I think, a worldview. It came back to, I think, a formative experience I had as a teenager in particular that shaped how I then went out and did a lot of other things in my professional academic life. And then that's what I've been dedicated to over the last number of years. And I've been really lucky to work with um, young social entrepreneurs in particular, although also of different ages, um, for most of my professional career.
That's amazing. So you started with your family, so to say. You
Hmm.
are multiple generations of social innovators or social activists at least,
Yeah.
and you have carried this tradition from way before you. Which sort of like a bonus question: what does
Hmm.
your family think about you?
Yeah.
That they started working locally, but now you have worked on so many different countries.
Yeah. I think that my family's been very supportive. Obviously, there could be desire, I think, for many of us who live in one place and have family in another, that desire to be closer physically is always there. I live in Ecuador. I have family in the U.S. My parents and sisters actually currently live in Canada. So, spread out across the world. That's been the nature of this path. Um, but very supportive and understanding, and I think there's an alignment there around values and worldview.
Hey, this is Carlos, the host from the Voices of the South. Did you know that you can join your voice with the Voices of the South so we can reach out to more people? Well, you can do it, and it's actually quite easy. The easiest way is to subscribe and share the episode with someone else. Another way, if you're feeling generous about it, is to help us in our Ko-Fi or in our Patreon. In Ko-Fi, you can donate as little as $1, and it's just a one-time donation that gets you a shout out at the end of the episode for the entire season. Meanwhile, if you join our Patreon, you would get different benefits, like getting new episodes 1 week before anybody else and exclusive material. But anyhow, without anything more to say, let us go back to the episode. That's cool. I ask you because during the past interviews with other social innovators, you often come with this not problem, but at least this questioning of the family. Like, oh my
Yeah,
god, my son or my daughter is gonna start working on social enterprise.
yeah,
How does that
yeah,
work? How are you gonna eat and live and everything? And a lot of the times for social innovators, the first challenge that you have to face is convincing your family that, yeah, you might not become the richest person in the world, but you are doing
hmm
this, and there is an opportunity for you to live out of this and still make change and
yeah,
create something new. But it's nice to know that previous generations were also open
yeah, yeah,
to let
yeah.
their
I'm in
children.
that minority group that had that part a little more easy.
Yeah, so to say, I mean, obviously you face other challenges as many
hmm
other social innovators. You started from being a social innovator yourself, and then transition it into supporting many in this case, in countries that you didn't grow up,
Yeah,
which is
correct.
sort of moving towards the next part of the
hmm
interview. What what was it being a foreign person in a foreign land
Yeah,
trying to promote something so abstract as social innovation, which in Latin America, that stuff and concepts like these reach later after
yeah,
they have been invented. How was this preaching
yeah.
towards this new public?
That's an interesting question. I think I have navigated this issue of cross-cultural work for most of my professional life. I've always worked in diverse contexts, people from very different backgrounds, and then a significant portion of my career has been working in countries that I don't, which are not the countries where I came from, where I was born. Um, I think that that's always a delicate balance. If you look at the larger, you could say that the sort of the change making space, the social entrepreneurship space, part of a larger tradition um, of work around community development, international development, as well as just a larger context of of both nonprofit and public sector change making that kind of came before this sort of new space. And if you look at in every one of those spaces, there are issues of um, that are very delicate around what happens when you bring together people from multiple countries. Sometimes that has a spark of innovation and excitement, and new things happen. Sometimes it can be handled poorly, and it can mean that one group is trying to tell another group what to do, and that's something I've always tried to avoid. I think you have to come in with a lot of humility, with the idea that people can collaborate and work well across cultures with respect for difference, and that you don't understand everything about the context immediately that you're working in locally, but that you work with good people who do, and you respect their expertise, and you try to share something from your side that will be helpful. I think, if, particularly in the space that I've worked in, one way around that kind of central problem of sort of the you know uh, this issue of hierarchies and power structures and cultural imposition, which is all things that can happen in a circumstance like that, is that I've always worked with supporting um, young and otherwise innovators who had come up with something in response to a problem that they saw in some ways in their own life or local context. And so the solutions themselves were not things actually that I was bringing in from outside. The solutions were coming up from the grassroots, from community levels, from really diverse groups of mainly young people all across these countries that were trying to do something that they felt was important, that they saw as necessary, that they had gained some kind of traction that showed that what they were doing was promising. And I was coming in to support, to help them to grow what they were doing and take it to the next level, to be more sustainable, more impactful. And I think when you come in with that type of a, a model, it's very different than coming in with like a pre-baked, top-down project where you're saying you have a problem locally in X, and this is what you need to do about it. I've mainly avoided that type of project over my professional career, although that is actually the dominant way in which, for example, international development programs are run. Um, the prescriptive or largely prescriptive models being brought in from a a big actor and then being executed. Um, and so I've tried to work more bottom up than top down.
Yes, definitely. As you say, it's a situation with a lot of the models in development that comes from top down rather than down up.
Hmm.
Because yeah, a lot of the social innovators comment that they sometimes feel trapped and constricted by the donors. Uh, the donors requirements, no,
Yeah,
what they ask you as a social innovation to
yeah,
maintain, and sometimes they're useful, sometimes they can be quite important, but other times they are a little bit too far away from the reality, from the field work,
yeah,
where they are asking stuff that it might not really prove anything, and it's just like an extra burden for
yeah.
many social innovators or yeah, NGOs going around. But yeah, the question was asked because you've been in quite a chunky part of Latin America,
Hmm.
Mexico, which is the biggest Spanish-speaking country, Brazil, who also is the
Yep.
largest Portuguese country,
Yeah.
and all in between.
Yes.
And even though we are in the same region,
Hmm.
language and uh, geographical region, some of them anyway, we are super different. Like the
Yeah.
differences between Mexico and Ecuador, you can probably tell.
Hmm.
The way the programs, the way the young social innovators are working probably is different.
Yes.
So I don't know if you could sort of tell us what is the maybe not the biggest difference, but
Hmm.
a little bit about what you find interesting approaching these different
Yeah.
cultures. Maybe Mexico and Brazil, who are the biggest or the biggest ones.
I mean, each country is obviously has really unique characteristics, and at the same time, there is a larger shared context in the region where there's certain things that are just either culturally or historically shared, right? That um, in terms of, for example, I would say that most of the Latin America region has a fairly similar approach to risk. That this idea of a slightly more conservative culture. When you were asking before about families, very common that, from a lot of family perspectives, in economies that traditionally have had limited opportunity, that young people should focus, for example, on public sector, or on like fighting for a handful of good jobs in quotations. That the entrepreneurship path is considered more risky. At the same time, there's a huge tradition of sort of entrepreneurship by necessity in the region in terms of mainly looking at small and medium-sized enterprises where people, because economic opportunity has been limited in terms of the number of sort of good jobs out there, that um, that people have always had to create things on their own, and a lot of that has been small businesses. Where it's a single person or their family members doing something at a local level. The rate of entrepreneurship actually for small and medium-sized enterprises is really high all across Latin America. Most of which is entrepreneurship that doesn't have a high growth potential or employment potential or innovation potential. Um, but there's there's a lot of things we could talk about. I think there's also a sense beyond this kind of issue of like how this shared, I think, sense of risk and of like what are the paths in which a young person can kind of set themselves up for success. There's a lot of shared ideas there, um, but there's other sort of cultural things, for example, that are positive. Like I think that there's a shared sense of 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 the importance of relationships, right? I think if you look at Latin America as a whole, all the countries across Latin America, um, people put a lot of emphasis on their social connections and their sense of the value of friendships and family. And I think in for example, comparing to the U.S. context and perhaps the European context, people they shift relationships more quickly. They move away from family. They feel perhaps less obligation towards the relationships. I think in Latin America, there's a sense of obligation. There's a sense of shared responsibility um, that is slightly different, right? And that expresses in terms of the social dynamics of social of taking action, of whether that's more traditional charity approaches or otherwise. Um, there's a shared history there. And then there's also elements around just culture, right? In terms of the particular mix of cultural ingredients, whether that is the sort of Spanish and Portuguese colonial history, indigenous cultures, Afro Latin cultures. Those are some other things that you can see. There's like certain things in common. Obviously, each country at the same time has very unique context, and so things like legal, financial policies and institutions. There are countries where it is much easier to register a new social initiative, whether that is nonprofit, for profit, or hybrid. There's countries that have made a lot of progress in establishing specific social enterprise legal frameworks around taxes, legal registration, bureaucratic control, some which are more favorable, some are less favorable. Um, there are also differences and also some shared challenges around just the context, right? Of like um, issues like public safety, issues like how easy is it to access capital, particularly if you're for profit, but even if you're non for profit, like how easy is it to get access to funding? Um, there are countries where that's more favorable, less favorable. A lot of that has to do with policy and institutions, right? Um, and eh, what I will say, just to close, is that all across Latin America there are incredible initiatives, incredible young people, incredible people of all ages that are doing things to make their communities better, and that's something I think that gives a lot of hope. Um, there really is an amazing level of activity, and but there's still serious challenges, and there's a lot of barriers that remain to be addressed.
Yes, definitely. Coming from Mexico, I do know, at least I can say from personal experience, that Mexico, when I was being a social innovator, was not the most friendly towards new
Yeah,
innovations,
yeah,
especially in policy and yeah, and the ability for you to become successful and the help that you get
yeah,
from local organizations. I do remember that one of my main complaints was that the project that I was part of was getting more support from organizations like International Youth Foundation and Ashoka, rather than the people in the ground, or sort
Mm.
of like the people in the immediate society, which
Yeah.
is something that was, yes, it's heartbroken for a
Yeah.
lot of reasons, and it's doesn't give you any courage to keep going or to sort of
Yeah.
work. You have to create this part on your own. At the same time, this same relationship that you mentioned, that
Hmm.
uh, we are so close, like family and societies
Yes.
are so close and so tied together, that a lot of the time is this understanding of society, understanding of family, that sort of push you into keep going, into keep trying, because you
Yes.
want to see these people that you care about have a better life, a better
Yeah.
opportunities in life. Which sort of, talking about hope, talking about things that get better and things that don't get that good, I want to go into the next section of the interview, which
Hmm.
is the biggest success and the biggest challenge that you faced during your career or until
Hmm.
now, and obviously according to you, to how you have lived these events in your career supporting social innovation in Latin America. What would you consider was the biggest success that you look back and be like, yeah, that's
Hmm.
the thing that I see and inspires me during a bad
Yeah.
day, and then the other challenge that might be something that you learn a lot from,
Yeah.
despite it
Um,
being.
I think one thing I can share um, is, I think one of the things that I feel most fortunate to have been a part of was that I was part of an amazing team of people um, for about 10 years when I was working at IYF, or the International Youth Foundation, that was able to kind of build this global network of programs that at its height was incredibly impactful and meaningful. Um, and grew in really surprising ways. And so I think the ability to kind of like have been part of a high performing team that then was part of kind of was able to sort of accomplish something bigger based on this vision that we had was incredibly rewarding. And to make it more concrete, when I sort of started at the International Youth Foundation, the Youth Action Program, which is this program that I mainly worked on, um, it had gone from it was a global fellowship program that supported 20 young people each year from all over the world, and there was a model of support that involved in-person training and virtual support over a period of about a year. And the model was very promising. It had been tested, a curriculum had been developed, and after about 5 years or so, IYF started a process of identifying local partners that using kind of a social franchise model, where this program, the model, the way we thought about working with young change makers that was effective, the things we figured out about how to do that could be shared and transferred to local partners who would execute their own programs in their own countries or regions, using an adapted model but being part of something larger, a global network. That was the vision. And so when I came on board, it had gone from a global program, pre me, to about, I think it was about five programs, five or six around the world. And so there was a program in Mexico that started. That was the very first program where we adapted the global model to a national context. And there was a program in Turkey and Spain, one or two other places. Um, and I was there at a very exciting moment in which we were able to grow that network in a major way. And so, particularly in that first like 5 or 6 years that I was at IYF, we just went through this period of scaling that was really exciting, where we went from those 5 or 6 programs that had kind of started the network, and we grew to 23. And so we kind of multiplied it by almost five, right? The number of national programs. And so we had program we had a program in English speaking Africa, French speaking Africa. We had a regional program for the Middle East for Arab young people. We added a program in Portugal in addition to the program in Spain. We had a national program in Jordan, in the Middle East. We opened a program in Kyrgyzstan. So kind of all across, and then in Latin America, I was personally involved with launching programs in Central America, in the Southern Cone, et cetera. And so building that together with a group of people that was not just at IYF, it was also all of the people that led these national and regional programs were incredible people, was really the privilege of a lifetime. And then through them, to meet all of these young people that were being supported. And at its height, we were across all these programs, recruiting and supporting a couple hundred um, youth-led social initiatives every year and all across the globe with different support initiatives. Um, yeah, so that's probably like when I look back at my career to date, being a part of that was an incredible privilege, and it was a community of people in a moment in our lives, in a moment in the world's history, in a moment in which the idea of social entrepreneurship was really taking off. Like our first programs, like when the first program was adapted from the global program to Mexico, the term social entrepreneurship was so unknown that they chose to brand the local program. Part of the way the structure of Youth Action was set up was that each program had its own local branding, but was part of the Youth Action Net global community. So the national program in Mexico, we ended up having two, but the first was used the term social development instead of social entrepreneurship, because social entrepreneurship was so weird and so unknown and so unfamiliar that they said, well, no one's going to know what that's about if we call it that. And so we went from that reality to a point where all of a sudden in the countries in which we worked, there were tens of actors all supporting social innovation, social entrepreneurship from their own angles and program models. And so being a part of that boom was really exciting. Building that global community, we ended up the network at its height again was had about 2,000 total between alumni and current ventures that we were supporting, and 23 national, regional, and a global program. So that was incredible. You asked about failures, and there's a lot of things I could share on that front. But one of the things I think that just the flip side of the story I just shared is that we were able to sustain Youth Action at finding different funding mechanisms, partner models, keeping a global team together, keeping a dispersed community of national collaborators together. For it was close to 20 years. I was a part of that for about 10. It was somewhere between 15 to 20 years was the total kind of history. And Youth Action, it still exists at some levels. And there's certain programs that are still being run, but over time, the ability to keep sustaining that just wasn't possible. And the funding came to a close. The global team kind of changed and went off into different new career opportunities. Our national folks as well, and there's kind of a history there, that is incredible. But that thing that we built, it lasted for a really amazing amount of time, and at the same time, it came kind of to a close. And that's not the type of failure. There's failures that are incredibly frustrating, and there's very few redeemable qualities. This is like a failure where you're like, okay, that was like the natural life cycle that it went through. And it would have been cool. I wish it was still going. I wish that there was maybe a new team of people that we'd been able to sustain it longer, more funding streams. But it just didn't. That's not the way it happened. And so there's a sadness associated with that as well, is what I would say.
Wow. Well, starting for the success for the part, yeah, it's amazing that from a single global program, it ended up being replicated and brought to so many different regions in the world. It's super amazing. I do remember that moment. Well, even though I was the 14th generation or something like that, from the award in Mexico, from the support in Mexico, I do remember that it was still called social development because again, as you say, social enterprise is something that people still are sort of getting their their minds to wrap around. I've
Hmm.
been in a lot of areas and sectors that they know that it exists, but it's still something that a lot of people just find it, I suppose, contradictory or maybe sorry. Yeah, really hard to come together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Social benefit with enterprises. Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's not necessarily like that. Obviously, it depends on the team and the people and the objective of the organization. But it is possible to have an organization that operates as a business, but
Hmm.
wants to primarily have social impact,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
which is something that a lot of persons around the world, people around the world, don't yet figure out how it can work.
Sure.
And going into the challenge, yeah, I mean, as you say, it it is a shame that it's not still going. It is a shame that it lost sort of the support, but it was also amazing that it lasted for so long.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I
I
think it's
mean,
part of the reality of work in this sector. You know, uh, of the enterprises, ventures, initiatives that are created for social impact, a percentage of them will continue indefinitely. You know, a lot of like really large global organizations right now were started off as what seemed like temporary initiatives, right? Whether that's the Red Cross or really big NGOs like CARE or Save the Children. You know, they were started off as like a response to a particular moment in history many decades ago, and now they're these like giant organizations that will probably always exist. Um, there's a percentage of social enterprises that are like will fall into that category. Um, you know, or if they're a company that they'll be like an IBM or something like that. That's like always around. But the reality is that a lot of enterprises, ventures, initiatives, whether for profit, nonprofit, they will have a life cycle where they come eventually to a close, and that could be for many reasons. It could be the financial and economic model. It could be the impact model. And I think one of the things that happened in the period in which I was involved with Youth ActionNet was um, at some level, the demand and need for what we were doing shifted because it went from this space in which no one was working, which we were sort of pioneering very new models, to spaces where I would say today, even in the countries where we had programs that no longer exist, there's still, I can say with confidence, you know, um, no programs that are exactly the same, but there's 5, 6, 10 actors doing something in that same space that do still exist. And so this idea of sort of like the impact is sustained over time. The work was important in its moment, but the organization itself doesn't have to last forever, or that's a project or an organization for it to be a full success. You know, and I think a lot of social initiatives that are started, they last for a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is, and then they come to a close. Maybe they get absorbed by a larger organization. Maybe their model becomes transferable to like the public sector. Maybe they just close. And they were important. You know, they were important in the lives of a number of people for some amount of time, and then new things happen, you know. And so I think we have to kind of also sort of detach ourselves a little bit from that sense of like um uh, you know, that the only success is to indefinitely remain running, right? I think the main way we should be thinking about success in this sector is, did we make the impact that we were trying to to reach? Was the work we did meaningful and executed according to our values? And was it important to someone in a given period of time? And I think if you've checked all those boxes, you can feel pretty good about the work you did, even if it no longer exists in the same way.
definitely. And that's one of the main motivators of this question of knowing what was the challenge or what was this failure or fucked up, if you want to call it like that, that
Hmm.
you have faced, in order for whoever is hearing us in the future to sort of learn and be like, oh, okay, if people like Joel or people like any other of the many of the social innovators that we have had with us
Hmm.
have failed or have faced a challenge that couldn't really overcome at that moment. That doesn't mean that that's it. That is the end
Yeah.
of the line.
Yeah.
It just means that you can learn from it and
Hmm.
you can create something else or you can transcend to something else.
Yeah.
And that's why we have that question in the guide. And I think it's one of the or I like this question, one of the questions that I like
Mm.
the most. But talking about the future, talking about the new social innovators, we're coming to one of the two last sections of the
Hmm. Hmm.
guideline. And yeah, I would like to ask you, what would you recommend to these new social innovators that might be hearing
Hmm.
us in a not so distant future? What would be something that you would like to share to them as a social innovator, as somebody
Yeah.
who has been working in the ecosystem for decades?
I think one thing I'll say, just kind of following up in this kind of previous part of the conversation, is that it's always good advice, I think, to fall in love with the problem and not the solution. And so, what does that mean? It means that if we're passionate about solving a particular problem, working on a particular issue, we can contribute to that from many different angles. There's many different ways in which we can continue to work on something we're passionate about over a lifetime. Um, and a lot of people that start something or are part of building something, it's very easy for us to fall in love with our solution. That we feel very attached to this thing that we created. We feel like it's obviously better in many ways than what else is out there. Um, that it becomes sort of like our baby, right? And we want it to kind of always still be around. Or we get very fixated on just maintaining it, keeping it going. And I think again, that vision of the problem of like, what is it? What's the change you're trying to create? When you have that clear, you realize that you have the freedom to work from many different roles, to work from many different spaces, um, to change over time, and to try new things. And also, there's an intellectual freedom there, which is that most social problems are around because they're very complex. And so we shouldn't always assume that the one way in which we've worked to solve a problem up till now is always the best way or the only way. Um, and we need that ability to experiment, to try new things, to have new beginnings, um, and to work from different spaces. And so I think I've seen young social entrepreneurs that I've worked with that over time have aged, have gone through different life changes. And maybe someone that was leading a social venture at one point is now running a business, just a for-profit business, is now working for a large nonprofit, is in academia, has taken time off just to focus on family. Um, is they created something and then sold it to somebody else, or were absorbed by a larger nonprofit. They go through a lot of different changes, and I think again, like being willing to say, yeah, like if I'm passionate about, for example, working on climate change, I can do that from my own venture. I can do that from a policy organization. I can do that as a researcher. I can do that as a citizen. I can do that as an employee. There's all these different ways in which we can work on that issue. And so fall in love with the problem, not with the solution.
That is an amazing advice. Being able to transform, being able to bend and to adapt to the situation and keep working towards what you believe that you want to work is a really good advice, because a lot of you're gonna face the struggles, you're gonna face frustration, you're gonna face a lot of
Hmm.
things, and as you say, is falling in love with the problem and falling in love with how to think about the problem and how to solve it is better
Hmm.
than to sort of plant your banner in a hill and stay there until the
Yeah.
last man,
Yeah.
which is not wrong. If people wants to do that, totally agree with them. I understand them. I know where they're coming from, but at the same time, perhaps it's always good to look back and wonder, well, maybe I am approaching that problem, the solution in a different. If I approach the solution in a different way, maybe the problem would be more willing to change, rather
Yeah,
than you
yeah,
spend your life and energy and everything on this idea that you have.
yeah.
Well, reaching the last part of the interview, I don't know if you have anything else that you want to add to the interview, anything that you want
Hmm.
to share with us that you believe is valuable.
Hmm.
Would be amazing for us to know.
Yeah. Just, I guess some final thoughts is just to encourage anyone who's listening to this podcast that obviously if you're listening, it's probably because you have an interest in these topics of social change and innovation, um, and so you've already kind of taken a first step, which is that you're aware, you're searching, you're engaging, um, but I think that my kind of one of my kind of career goals, you could say, or one of the things I'm working on in terms of the problem that I'm passionate about helping solve is that I think that the world needs many, many more people who uh, are willing to and committed to, from their own space, making the world just a little bit better, whether that's in a really big way or in more limited ways. And so I hopefully whoever's listening to this, um, they can feel some inspiration to keep going, to do a little more, to work on the issues that they're passionate about from their own angle, from their own lives, to start something new, to collaborate with others, and that I definitely believe in a model of development or change in which many people all over the world try many different things, experiment, grow, um, uh, scale, and I think that's how the world will be able to solve some of the really serious challenges that it faces that can feel overwhelming at times. Is the acts of many people doing some small things, maybe some bigger things, but that kind of collective intelligence is, I think, has a tremendous potential. And so hopefully, do your part, get involved, and think big.
Thanks for those for that thought. Yeah, it's important. We need more social innovators. We need more people tackling the problems that they are all over the world. Especially because we are entering into an era where the problem that you face might share some characteristics with another problem other on the other side of the world, but the way to solve it might be different.
Yeah.
And the more minds that we have into trying to tackle these small specific challenges, the better. Is the more
Hmm.
chances we're gonna get to actually come to a solution.
Yeah.
Um, well, again, thank you very much for the time, Joel. Thank you very much for the sharing these experiences and sharing a little bit of your history. Just to finish the interview, if people want to contact you, if people want to reach out to you, how can they do that?
Yeah. Um, Thank you, Carlos, for the opportunity to connect and to share. The best way to reach me is either through Twitter or through LinkedIn. You can search in both cases with my name, and it's my name is not that common, so you'll find me on either platform. Feel free to follow me on Twitter or on LinkedIn, or send me a direct message. I'd love to be in touch, and to continue the conversation with anyone who's interested.
Okay. Well, if there is nothing else that you want to tell to us or to the audience, this would be all. Again, thank you very much, and thank you for being the voices of the South.
Thank you.
Thank you for hearing this episode of the Voices of the South. Be sure to subscribe and rate the podcast, and see you on our next episode. The Voices of the South is brought to you thanks to our patron, Sergio R., Bank A. Alma, N, Laura, N, Lois, E. If you want to join them, you can do so at www.patreon.com/the Voices of the South.